Hello, everybody, and welcome to the ABT Time podcast. This, I believe, is episode 39, more or less. And lots of exciting things going on here in ABT land. We finished the 25th round of the course back in March. In April, we started a whole new version that we're referring to as ABT 2.0 with the Pfizer global epidemiology team. They had done the course, and then we're getting so much out of it halfway through, they said, we don't want this to stop. So we came up with this idea of basically what I like to think of as the shift from acute to chronic. So you can think of the course as being acute ABT, where you're bombarded with 10 1-hour sessions and you get all this information very quickly. And then we've shifted into the chronic long-term phase, which is the ABT 2.0 form, which consists of weekly 1-hour sessions, Thursday morning for 1 hour, week after week after week. And we'll be doing it all summer with them. And those sessions involve one person giving just a 3-minute presentation. And then the 15 people that did the course there are what we call our builders. Basically, it's just like a working circle. They all know the ABT framework, and then we set to work on the criteria, 5 different topics that we go through for the person's narrative and work on it for half an hour. And actually keeping a running scribe, one person's in charge of keeping notes on all that gets said and all the suggestions. And as we kind of rework the ABT and strengthen it, it's basically, I mean, Matt and I are really fascinated with what we're doing now, because it's kind of like the writer's room in a Hollywood show. It's everybody working together on the narrative, shaping it as a single unit. This has never been done for the science world, but we're getting a ton out of it. And it's so productive and fun and interesting that on August 2nd, we will be taking it more broadly to 4 of our partner groups that we're locking in right now. I'll announce that in the next few weeks. And that's going to be something where if you want to listen in as an observer, just get in touch with us and we'll give you the RSVP address, and you can each week start to tune in. And we're just calling it the Real Narrative Gym. And this is the real dream vision, which is the course is good. That's what you need to be able to get this stuff to work. But the dream vision is the narrative gym, where you're week after week after week revisiting the stuff. And what we're seeing with the Pfizer folks is you forget so much. Everybody does. Everybody that's taken this ABT framework course, I'm beginning to come to the belief that you only retain about 10% of the stuff. And these folks worked really hard. As a matter of fact, the Pfizer group was the only one that we've ever added on a 5-hour lab, where we did 5 1-hour working circle type exercise with them and a bunch of other things. So they got a deeper dose of it, and they're very, very hardworking, bright. And yet, as we've started in on these weekly sessions now in the Real Narrative Gym, and I bring up topics from the course, it's clear, lots of blank stares. And it's a lot of material. It takes a long time to absorb this stuff. It's a whole journey, as we know, but it's a really fun journey, and we're having a great time with that. And this is going to be extra super duper fun on August 2nd when we start in on the broader version of the narrative gym for everybody who wants to tune in. So that's what we're up to right now with the ABT. Well, there's one more little tidbit to add in. Let's see. We've got a few groups coming together for the fall. We'll be firing up again with the course. And we also, about 6 or 7 of us are now writing a paper. This is going to be my first publication in 20 research publication in over 25 years since departing from the world of science. But it's about the narrative metrics, the butt-to-N ratio and the N frequency, the 2 metrics that I've been developing for 7 years now. We've been using in the course with great success, and they're very robust. And we've done a study now, and we have a very solid data set for them. So it's just a matter of getting it written up and submitted to. We've got a whole list of different publications we'll be taking a shot at. And it's basically turning this into the tool that everybody needs to apply it to your own work very quickly and simply, to use these metrics to look at what you've created and figure out, am I drawing on the power narrative or not? This will give you a pretty clear idea. So that's all fun stuff. And even more fun than all that is the guest that we have today. My old buddy, Zen Faulkes, who I did a visit to his university about a decade ago. We're going to have to remember exactly when that was. I was around 2012, I believe. He, at that point in time, was at the University of Texas Pan American in South Texas. And now he is at McMaster University in Canada. And Zen has been a long-time fan, supporter, and student and co-explorer on the ABT pathway and narrative in general. He wrote to me just a few weeks ago and sent me a podcast that he was on where he was talking about the difference between narrative and story. And it seemed to me he was getting it exactly right. So suddenly sat up and realized that, wow, we need to have him on the podcast here to dive into that and a number of other things. So there's three topics we're going to go through. We'll get into the narrative versus story thing. We'll also talk about the DHY template, despite however yet he is part of the founding of that template. But our first topic is his book that he has published recently, and it is titled Better Posters, Plan, Design, and Present an Academic Poster. And on that note, Zen, how about if you join me? Are you there, Zen? And where are you coming to us from?
Absolutely, I am here. And I, as you just mentioned, would normally be coming from you from Southern Ontario, very near where the father of modern medicine and notorious scientific prankster William Osler grew up. Actually, I heard you talking
hang
about
on, one of my heroes. Oh my! Yes, I got his book. I got a big fat biography on him. We're gonna have to talk about him a little bit. So keep going.
Yeah, he grew up in Dundas, Ontario, which is where I live, and I was listening to one of your earlier podcasts talking about one of his pranks.
Yes.
And it's like, wait a second, I go up Osler Drive all the time, and there's like a memorial to him and stuff like that. But today I am actually coming from Southern Alberta, Pincher Creek, Alberta, where I am visiting my family and taking a little bit of time to stay with them. So this interview, we've been trying to set this up for a couple of days because I said, I'm going on the road. And so I just got here, but I'm pleased to be here now talking to you from sunny Southern Alberta.
Okay, well, before we get into our whole agenda, you have already preempted everything with the mention. First off, you pronounce it Osler. I've always heard it as Osler in the Oslerian Society. Do you know for a fact which way it's pronounced?
I do not. Just after I had heard about some of the pranks he pulled, I went looking up these because one of my little side projects is I've been collecting academic hoaxes. And so I found some references to one of the hoaxes that actually made it into print. And one of the things that I read was a pronunciation that was Osler, but I do not know. It was only one thing where I saw the pronunciation.
Yeah, interesting.
But I was absolutely fascinated, and I added this to my collection that here's this guy who in the 19th century was publishing scientific dick jokes.
Exactly. It's unbelievable. And that's probably what you heard me raving about the guy. Same thing for me, because, I got that award, the John P. McGowan Award. And so I felt it was my due diligence to read up on who McGowan was. And then it turned out I think he was maybe the founder of the Oslerian societies that throughout the US or something like that. And then I started digging in, well, who's this guy Osler? And then I come across that stuff and like, oh my God, he's my hero. In the 1870s was showing up at these medical conferences and signing into the hotels with his fake name, and everybody's, passing rumors that, do you remember the name of the fake persona he created?
It's
Priceless.
Edgerton or
yes.
something like that.
Yes.
Edgerton Yorick Davis.
That's it. Exactly.
I'm not sure of the first one. I know it was an E name, but it was definitely Yorick as in a fellow of infinite jest, and Davis just as the somewhat plausible, Anglo name.
And then he had gotten infuriated over somebody who'd published an article about, what was it?
Vaginismus.
Dentitis or something. And then he came up with his own cockamamie medical condition that he also published.
Which apparently was actually cited as a true thing for decades until about the 1970s or so. And it's basically, for those of you who have not dug into the 19th century hoax literature, it's basically a paper where he claims to have had a case study of a couple that got stuck together during sex. And that was published.
It's unbelievable. Did you happen to hear the episode about 4 or 5 ago where I had on my buddy Dana Ono and we talked about Carl Lehm, the ichthyologist?
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
you did hear
that? Was the episode.
Okay, excellent. Because if you need to write a book on academic hoaxes, are you gonna do that?
I've been collecting them. There is an online version where I have collected as many academic hoaxes as I could find, and I'm up to about 20 or so.
Oh man,
now.
You know, they scale all the way up to who was the guy that his students littered the ground with all the fake orangutan jawbones or something? You know, that guy from the 1800s.
Are you thinking of? You're not thinking of Piltdown Man, are you?
Is that what it was? Piltdown? Yeah, sorry, that's my brain is fading.
A little more elaborate than that, but no, I mean there's been a lot of hoaxes. I was not trying to get the hoax, all of the hoaxes. I was just trying to get the ones that sort of made it into print. Because there's been a lot of hoaxes which have been like went into like newspapers or popular media,
right.
but
Yeah.
I'm actually looking at ones that actually made it into alleged scientific journals. So that's been my,
I got you. Okay.
One of my little side projects. And
because did you hear me mention about the obituary for George Lauder in there with Carl Lehm?
Yes.
Yeah. Doesn't that qualify? Can't you squeeze that in?
I think so. I haven't had a chance to look that one up. There were so many gems in that episode of hoaxes and pranks.
I don't know why I find it so interesting.
And I just decided, well, I'll track down the oldest one chronologically first.
Oh God, go for it. Make a book out of it. That's definitely needed. All right. So we got sidetracked on that, but that's awesome. Okay, let's begin by diving in on your book. Better Posters, Plan, Design, and Present an Academic Poster. And when did you come out with this book?
This is 1 year and 1 week ago. So it was in 2021.
Nice.
May 2021 was when it was published. It was originally supposed to come out in the first quarter of 2020, but that was not a good time for anything happening.
Oh, I know.
Especially a book about, here's what you can do in large indoor face-to-face gatherings of a poster session.
Exactly. Right.
It was like, there's no need to publish that book this year.
Yeah, you're right.
So it got pushed back.
Might as well have a book about how to throw a good cocktail party or something.
Exactly. It's like, now is not the time.
Interesting. Well, I can kind of guess what this book is about, Better Posters. Tell us a little bit about the origin of where it came from.
So I have been blogging for many years, and one of my projects was about academic conferences, because as somebody who is interested in communication and what scientists do, it seemed to me that there was a lot of information about how to give good presentations and how to write papers. But one of the very first things that a lot of scientists do in their career, often like the very first line in their CV, is a conference poster.
Right.
And I mean, what was your first line in your CV, Randy? Do you remember? Was it a poster? Was it a talk? Or
I have no earthly idea.
You have no. Okay,
that was back
blank
in the
that out.
Cro-Magnon era. So, yeah,
but
totally
for a lot
lost.
of people, for a lot of people, that is their very first one. And I was looking at it. It's like it is such a peculiar way of communicating. Like it's very, very unique to not only universities and academics, but even more so just like scientists, the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. And I just sort of looked around and there was very, very little. And I thought, okay, I'm going to start writing about this to start providing a resource for people. And it was one of those projects that sort of took on its own life because more and more people started to find it. And they would tell me, hey, Zen, I'm really recommending your blog about posters to my students. And it was like, that was great. It was very flattering to know that that resource was available. But it was always in the back of my mind that it really wasn't fair to a student to be told, okay, here's this great resource of 10 years of disorganized blog posts of whatever I happen to feel like writing about this week. And I thought, there's really a need for something which is coherent, organized, all in one place. And the opportunity came up to turn that into an actual book. And I thought, yeah, there is a need for that. So I decided to write that book. And I tell people all the time, look, the ideas are on the blog. They're all free, right? What you're getting with the book is organization. And so that's been very rewarding little side project. And now, actually, I have to say, it's become the thing that I am best known for. I go to after many years as a scientist and over many dozens of peer-reviewed technical papers, I go to a conference. It's like, you're the poster guy. It's like, yes, I'm the poster guy. I will roll with it. It's like, I will embrace my destiny of being the poster guy if necessary. So that's sort of the backstory behind the book. And I still feel like it's something which is very, very needed, because despite the title, there's still a long way to go for a lot of posters as communication. And I've sort of realized that because this is the very first thing that so many people do as a professional scientist or even professional communication, if I can do something to introduce people at this very, very early stage to some good communication practices like, the ABT format, that is something that will maybe carry them through their whole academic career. So that's one of the reasons why I think that posters are actually need a lot more love and attention, because you can really get a lot of things learned and to people at that early stage where they can really have a chance to practice it throughout their early part of their career. So it just becomes, second nature as they go forward.
Well, and, as I'm thinking back now, I don't think I ever gave a poster my whole science career. I think in part because the first meeting I ever went to, the East Coast Benthic Ecology meetings, I gave a talk at, and back then there were enough speaking slots and everything that everybody give a talk if they wanted to. And then a lot of people opted for posters because they didn't want to give a talk. And I always enjoyed giving talks. But I know nowadays a lot of meetings, you kind of have to apply, and only a certain number of people get chosen to give the talks, right? And then you end up being told that that's your only option is to give a poster. Isn't that right for a lot of meetings?
Yes. One of the things that I think also spurred me on to this topic in particular is I went to what I think might be the biggest scientific conference in the world, because that was my field, which was the neuroscience meeting. And now
how big is that? I've heard that before. How big is that meeting?
Oh, do you want to take a guess? I'll tell you high or low.
Maybe 25,000 people.
Oh, that's a pretty good guess, actually, when you count all this. Yeah, it is. When you include all the non-scientific people.
Yeah, AGU is like around, I think, maybe 10 or 15,000. I know that that's bigger than that. So yeah, is that the neighborhood of it? Okay, little transitional blip there. We were having some dropout problems with the Zoom connection with Zen, so asked him to switch to phone connection, which is what we have now, and shouldn't have any more technical problems with that. So let's see, we were talking about the size of these meetings, and I know the AGU meeting is around 10 to 15,000, and I know the neuro meeting is even bigger than that. Isn't that right, Zen?
Yes. So the neuroscience meeting now is, when you include everybody, like all the vendors and everything, it's topped 30,000 a few times. And when you have a meeting that big, there's basically two things that make a meeting that big possible. One is jet engines, so that you can have people who can travel the distance to make a meeting like that. And the second thing is poster sessions, because there's no way with 20 to 30,000 people that you can have everybody get up and give a talk. It's just impossible. So poster sessions are absolutely critical for a lot of the larger scientific meetings around the world.
Yeah, interesting. On a side note, I'm on a panel this week in which I will be talking to them about, it's for one government agency, don't want to say who, but one of their employees I talked to, and that employee said, Number one problem with that person's job, we're being over communicated to. Their central office bombards them with so many updates, briefings, newsletters, and just on a daily basis that they're just glutted. And part of the job is to keep up with everything coming down the pike. And that's a narrative problem. It's a fire hose of too much information. Somebody's got to be working on the nozzle there to pull it back and reduce it. And how do you decide what to reduce things to? That's where narrative comes in. In fact, I know the 6th section in your book is narrative thinking. Tell us about that.
Well, one of the major problems is exactly the one that you just described on 2 levels, which is over communication. So on the individual level, as I said, a lot of people who are pulling together a poster are new students, and a poster is a really, really tough format. And because they are new, they don't really have the experience to sort of determine, okay, what's the critical point here and what is a footnote? What's the major point that I really want to make? And so they tend to throw in everything. It's like, I want to show that I've done a lot of work, and so I'm going to put in all the data onto this one page. And it can get a little bit crazy of just how much they want to communicate to you. Now, you take that on the sort of the individual poster maker's point, and then you multiply that out by 10, 15,000 posters at the really, really big meetings, and you're walking through and you're trying to figure out, what is it that I want to see? So everything is about attention, competing for attention, and trying to figure out, okay, what are the things that I really want to see? And as a communicator, what are the key things that I really want to communicate? And I found that the ABT structure is one of the best ways to help people focus and drill down and say, okay, you've got all of this data that you want to put on your poster, but it's not all equally important. Really, I want you to sort of take it and drill it down, and you should be able to tell somebody what your poster is about in a sentence. And the ABT is quite often that sentence. And it really helps people focus and drill down.
Yeah.
In a way that I haven't found anything else.
That's really good to hear. And I think what we would tell you is that, and you won't find anything else. It is just simply the DNA of story, as our buddy Park Howell likes to say. That's really nice to hear. And it is slowly but surely propagating itself outward. I gave a talk back in February, and the graduate student that was setting that up while we were chit-chatting before the talk started, she said, "Oh, I've had the ABT thing in 3 different workshops that I've done." That's kind of nice to hear, bit by bit. What's the deeper challenge, as you know, is that, and what we're talking about nowadays with the course is the ABT framework exists at least 2 levels. There's the primary level, which is just 3 words, and, but, therefore, and exactly as you say, putting together your 1-sentence summary of that. And then what we're getting into in the course, and is in the narrative gym books as well, is the secondary level, which is within those 3 elements. There's a whole lot more detail. As a matter of fact, let me share with you, have you heard about the MAT template?
Which template? I don't think I have.
The MAT template, that would be the template named after the very fellow that's helping us right now record this session, Matt, who's worked with me for the last 2 years. And when he first went to work on the course with me, we began the course at the beginning of the pandemic, and we've run 25 rounds of it now. And Matt's been the guy that's every single one of the Zoom sessions. He's been there with me. And so he's been force fed 25 times 10, 250 sessions of this course. And slowly but surely, inevitably, he starts percolating out all these different realizations about, that one thing you talk about, I've been thinking about it lately. And have you thought about this and that? And month after month, he started coming out with these suggestions like, oh my God, I did not think of that. And then about 6 months ago, hit me with the deepest, broadest, most powerful of all of these suggestions, which is so important. We've labeled it the MAT template. And that is, when you look at the ABT, the and, but, therefore, when you're looking at it in narrative terms, and even in the most impersonal, inorganic, scientific terms possible, the template is basically heaven and heaven, but hell, therefore action. And even for, a research project, what you want for that first part, the blue material, we color code it, that first part, the end material, you want to paint a picture of heaven. And you want to talk about, this disease has been studied for all these years and we've been sequencing these genes. And if we can get all the genes sequenced, then look at the wonderful things we can do in the world. But right now we've run into this one gene that we cannot figure out, blah, blah, blah. Therefore, we're doing the following work. And that's the template right there, and the key point of it is to realize that you want to kind of purify these three segments. You want the whole lead up to the word but to be all agreement. You want it to be all statements of good things, basically painting a picture of where the world is headed to or could be headed to and the great things you could achieve. Then you drop the bomb on the word but we're not there because we've got this problem we haven't been able to solve. And that points then to the therefore, which is therefore we're doing this sort of work. Does that make sense to you at the broadest and simplest of levels?
Yes, absolutely. And it reminds me a little bit of another way of thinking about presentations, which was from Nancy Duarte, who talks about the difference between what is and what could be. And, when you're talking about, well, it could be heaven, but what we have is hell, right?
That's it. It. Yeah.
And the bigger that contrast that you can make, the stronger the narrative fuel is going to be.
Yes, exactly. And the ultimate power and strength comes through simplicity and communication. And that's why I thought I'd cracked the nut all the way down to the ultimate simplicity with just and, but therefore, and then Matt took it this even broader level of just heaven, but hell, therefore action. I mean, it really is that. And the reason that's such a good, simple tool is because you look at a lot of people's ABTs and they put them together and they get into a whole bunch of problem stuff before they ever get to the but. And they start off by talking about, we've been studying this thing and we haven't worked out this and that, and we're not in the blah, blah, blah. And what you need to do once you get the first draft put together is to go back and look at it and make sure that it really, are we doing all heaven, 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 all the way up to the but? And if you're not, you're diluting down things and you're having a lesser impact. The more you can get these things organized and make sure you've got your elements in the right places, that's what it's about. But that's really, really good that you've got that in there. And we got to get you to take part in the course somehow, some way, eventually. We'll work on something towards that because that's really great. And the poster dimension is very, very cool. I don't know if you ever heard the little anecdote that I tell about the improv instructor at the AGU meeting. What was it? The Ocean Sciences meeting, and about 10 years ago that I brought along. She replaced my buddy Brian Palermo for that one meeting because he had to cancel at the last minute. And we had a moment where a group of the graduate students came up to her and said, we've all got posters. Have you got any recommendations on posters out of this stuff in communication? And I was just stunned. She'd never been to a science meeting in her life. And she turned to them and without a single or hesitation, she just spouted out a 3-step process for them on how to do a poster. She'd never even looked at a poster in her life. And she said, let's let me think the 3 things. She said, first off, let's see, you put together your poster with the ABT structure to the poster, and somebody walks up to you and says, what's your poster about? You tell them your ABT. And then step 2, you ask them, what do you work on? And you listen as they're telling you what they work on. And as you're listening, you're trying to find something in what they do that connects with what's on your poster. And then step 3 is you find that thing and you say, you work on this thing and that's actually similar to this and that. I always thought that was a really good methodology to try and build that bond, especially.
And I'm pretty sure that is in the book, actually.
Yeah.
I think through you. I think you had told some iteration of that to me, or I saw it in something that you had written. And I think that is really key, because one of the things, narrative is useful, but particularly in the context of a conference or something like that, what it's doing is it's sort of a stepping stone to conversation. Yeah. And I feel like with a poster, one of the big advantages there is that it is the opportunity to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this a little bit sort of before we came on, and I really thought narrative and conversation are two different things and different skills. And I think this is something that you mentioned in an earlier podcast where you had somebody in one of your classes saying, well, you're saying to say but the improv people are saying you should always say and to keep the conversation going, right? To keep the scene going. And I think that is one of the differences there. And I don't have, maybe if I ever get a chance to do a second edition of the book, maybe I'll have a chapter about conversational thinking, but it absolutely is so critical. And really very few people do it. That point of, okay, why are you here? Why are you, out of all these hundreds, dozens, thousands of posters, whatever it is, why did you stop in front of mine? And just taking that second to have that conversation and make that sort of personal connection is, I think, really, really valuable.
Well, absolutely. And that's why this improv stuff is so important, because that is what it teaches. And science doesn't teach communication. I mean, it doesn't teach interaction. It really does teach it inevitably. It's so terrifying becoming a scientist and doing all that sort of stuff that you are forced into this tunnel vision thing of pounding away on, what am I giving the world? What's my whole thing? And it's inevitable that unless you've got some opposing force forcing you to think more broadly and listen to the world, that you're going to end up. And that of course is my whole journey. That's the beginning of my Don't Be Such a Scientist book, was about how I headed off to Hollywood at age 38 and sat there in the acting class with that teacher screaming at me the first night, just saying, I don't want your type in here because I know your type. You don't listen. And what good is it having somebody in here who doesn't listen in an acting class? I can't teach you anything. Your mind is going to keep telling me how the world works. And that's exactly who I was at that point. And I probably still am a fair amount, but it's really tough. I mean, it's inevitable that the science training pounds you into that. There's so much pressure to tell your whole thing of what you do, that it's really a secondary skill to get beyond that instinct to actually start develop the ability to open up, relax, and listen. And that's where you see, some of the better scientists further down the road are able to do that. But that said, some of the senior ones that I work with have lost the ability to listen entirely, but that's a whole nother story. But yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. Interesting. Have you done some improv stuff?
No, I have not done that. I mean, I did a little tiny bit of theater as an undergraduate, but it wasn't improv in any sense of but it was just, I took, as part of my undergraduate degree, it was a liberal arts education. So I did sciences, and I also was interested in acting and so forth. And I suppose one of my other backgrounds is I was also a movie projectionist through my undergraduate days. That was how I paid my way to university. And so I've just always been interested in narrative storytelling and so forth, and visual communication through movies. And so that was also another sort of, I suppose, inspiration to thinking about, okay, how are you doing visual communication in a poster format, in a graphic format as well?
All right. Well, that then leads us to our second topic here, which is what's the difference between these words, narrative versus story?
Well, according to you, which I agree with. So, no, because I think that I really like the definition that you have, and I agree with. Narrative is a series of events that occur while trying to solve a problem.
Well done. You get an A, not quite an A plus. You missed one or two words in there, but you got the basic thing. So you just passed your narrative test. Okay, keep going. And story includes that. But for me, when somebody says story, there's a whole bunch of other things that are included in with that. And for me, it's usually the big thing that I think is part of story, but not narrative, are things like
character,
Yeah.
theme, and so forth.
Yep.
And a lot of other things. But usually I think character is one of the major differences for me, because I can't really sort of imagine a story that doesn't have characters, but I can imagine a narrative that doesn't have characters.
Yeah. Yep.
And
This is very good to hear, because I've made this stuff up as I'm going along and put it in the books. And really, in the Houston book in 2015 was the place where Brian Palermo was the guy who pushed me over and over again in the workshop. And he said, you owe it to these science folks to give them an analytical breakdown and distinguishing these two words, story and narrative. And when I went to the humanities folks, 3 different humanities people said to me, you can't pull them apart. A narrative is a story is a narrative. And it's a great big mess, those words. And so I did finally dig in, and via the hero's journey and Campbell came up with this analytical definition, exactly what you said. Poor old Marlis Douglas, a part of our course, every time in the first round, I put her on the spot and cut to her and ask her to please tell us the definition of the word narrative. And she recites the 15 words. Narrative is a series of events that occur in the search for the solution to a problem. And that is what it is. And I've been waiting for somebody to debate with me and say, no, that's not the definition that we want for narrative, because it is. And that is one of my missions, is that I am determined to fight for the clarification, because there's a big mess in the world of medicine. There's a whole field called narrative medicine, which really ought to be called personal medicine. And there's other places that have right. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about with that? Yeah.
I have never heard of that particular thing, narrative medicine, before, but I can see again how that word can be.
Yeah. The distinction in the medical world,
in lots of different ways.
Yeah. What they make in the distinction in the medical world is that they will talk about basically epidemiological problems, the numbers of people suffering from Alzheimer's in the United States. And they see that as one bunch of information. And then they'll talk about a single family who's had the genes or whatever through multiple generations for disease. And they'll call that narrative medicine, where we look at one individual family. That should be called personal medicine, because the narrative dynamic is present for both of those things. It's the setup, the problem solution dynamic. And whether you're talking about sheer numbers of all the people in the US, or if you're talking about one family, you're talking about the same thing, the problem of this disease and the search for the cure to it, and all the steps along the way in the search for the solution to the problem. And once you kind of unify it through that, then you can categorize these other things. The other world that I witnessed, what a mess it is when I went to film school. They split filmmaking into these 2 categories, documentary filmmaking and what they call narrative filmmaking. And narrative filmmaking refers to fiction features and all those things. But every documentary, if it's any good, has narrative structure to it as well. So you've just fouled it all up, and there's been a need for a revision, but it's so hard to stop things and revise anything. So everything just kind of gets moved along piecemeal, but that's okay. In the world of the ABT framework, we have this very clear divide, and it's great to hear someone like you getting it crystal clear like that. And you can see the power of making that distinction then, right?
Well, and I just want to reiterate a little story that I've told a few times, which is I gave in one of my communication classes, at the end of the class, gave students 2 editorials that had appeared in some scientific journal. One called for more, as the editorial called it, storytelling in science, which would basically meant narrative. Right?
Yeah, that's what you were talking about on that other podcast. Yeah, right. And one of them was the one by Katz from MIT, right?
I believe so. And then the other editorial said, no, we don't want to do that. And I gave that to my students and said, okay, which of these 2 positions do you take? And it was fascinating, because I'd never had an entire class on one side of an issue. And they all said, we don't think there should be, as they put it, storytelling in science.
Right.
And it was incredibly clear what they thought that word meant.
Yep.
And it's exactly what you said. They viewed that as fiction, like narrative filmmaking, right?
Yep.
And I was sort of gobsmacked, because I thought after spending an entire semester with me that at least some of them would be on board for the idea of, build in a narrative and do this and do that and ways to communicate. But it was like, nope.
Yeah.
I failed in my indoctrination of my students.
No, that's all very, very good. And the irony was, and so in the Houston book, I talked about those same, that was a sequence they had in Nature on debating back and forth about storytelling for scientists.
Yeah.
And Katz was the guy from MIT who wrote that piece arguing against storytelling for scientists. And the first irony of his whole article there is that the first paragraph is perfect ABT structure. So he uses narrative structure to argue against storytelling, and I'm right there with him, exactly as you're saying. And people labeled me, oh, that's the guy who's saying scientists need to tell stories. And I try and say, no, I'm not. I've not said that. The one glitch that I have is that I subtitled the Houston book, Why Science Needs Story. And that was very intentional. And it comes out of the world of film, where you read a script or a book or something and you say, this needs more story. And what it means is it needs more narrative structure, stronger narrative content. And so the word story becomes not just a noun for, I'm going to tell you a story, but also a descriptor. This thing needs more story. And that was the subtitle. And then the knucklehead who reviewed the book for Science ended up quoting the subtitle and adding on his own the letter A in there, and said the subtitle was Why Science Needs a Story. And that's completely different meaning, completely wrong.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. I contacted the editors and said, won't you please let me publish a letter to the editor addressing this, showing how, because actually more to the story, as I was developing that subtitle, I had two versions. I sent that one out to two groups of friends, probably 5 or 6 friends, each, who were scientists and then filmmakers. All the filmmakers said, excellent subtitle, Why Science Needs Story. 3 out of the 5 scientist friends said, you left out the A in your sentence, Why Science Needs a Story. And I had to write back to them and say, no, you don't realize that in the world of story development, that's a descriptor. And that's what I'm drawing on there, because in the science world, they don't see it as a descriptor. They just know that one word story and storytelling, as you're saying. So that really matches exactly that whole experience. And it's just a ongoing campaign for which we haven't even begun to scratch the surface. And it doesn't surprise me at all your students would have exactly that standard perception, which is the story phobia that I talk about in the books. And what can you do? I mean, it's fascinating how little of this science communication stuff reaches much of the science audience. And I have now written 8 books on science communication, all that kind of stuff. And virtually nobody in the science world has read any of my books or any of that sort of stuff. You know, it's constantly introducing myself to audiences of scientists. I mean, it's not that it bums me out or anything like that. It's just how enormous the challenge is to someday get communication. This is an interesting aside, and sorry, this is turning into my own interview. I'm taking the floor away from you, but it's all relevant, which is my buddy Joe Levine, who's the co-author of Miller and Levine. You know, I think at least used to be the best-selling college biology textbook. And I had talked to him at one point about what needs to happen in an introductory textbook like that in biology. Is the first chapter needs to be about communication, and it needs to be about communication in today's world. Too much information is the absolutely essential dynamic, because everybody's getting lost on everything. So you need to start even at the intro level with that. And his answer back to me is, nice idea, but what are you going to throw out? And I sort of said, what do you mean? And he said, you need to realize that every one of these textbooks are a giant economic marketing exercise with 25 authors involved in it. And every author owns their 5 or 6 pages, and they get paid for it and they want it. And who are you going to fire and take away 3 or 4 of their pages to devote to communication? Because they certainly aren't going to make the books any longer. And if anything, each year they keep getting shorter and shorter. And therein lies the battle of that. That's the net result that results in your having that group of students there that just haven't been enlightened at all on the importance.
And it's absolutely the case that again, you've got that far too much stuff. And one of the things that I'm sort of aware of, you know, as an educator, is there's only so much time that we have with students.
Yeah.
And so we're always thinking about, okay, what's going to be the thing that we are going to spend our time doing, because we cannot train students in everything.
Yeah.
It's just a fool's mission, even though I just wrote a book about things like, visual communication for posters and so forth, I'm sort of aware that I can't expect, grad students working on a PhD trying to master the science and doing all these sorts of things to also get a full degree and professional preparation in graphic design, right? So that is, I think, a real challenge. People keep saying, well, we should train people in this and this and this and this and this, and it's a tough problem.
It absolutely is. I'm just looking here on my bookshelf. Did you get a chance to listen to the episode we did of the podcast with Bruce Block, the professor of visual expression at USC?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, there you go.
And I can prove it. I can prove it too. Shape, line, color.
There you go.
Tone, yes. Tone, movement, rhythm. Oh, damn it. I'm forgetting one again.
Shape, line, form, tone, movement, rhythm. Yeah, exactly. The 7 elements of visual expression. Did you get a copy of his book?
Yes.
It's pretty expensive. And I would only recommend it.
We have libraries.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Yeah. I would only recommend buying one if you're really serious on the subject, but you are serious on the subject. And, that guy in his course is legendary, and he was great on the podcast. He's such a good guy. I think he's 70 years old, but he sounds like he's still in his 40s. Just razor sharp. And there's so much in visual expression. And that is the tough thing is, right now, I'm working with these folks at Pfizer on their presentations. And now that we moved on to this ABT 2.0, each week, each person gives a 3-minute talk that they're allowed to have 3 slides. And as a general rule, they're filling the slides with full sentences and just tons and tons of text on there. And, they don't understand this basic idea of how powerful the visual channel is. And it's so powerful, it overrides anybody's ability to listen. And if you put up a slide that is going to force people to read even 3 or 4 sentences, their ears are shutting down through all that time. Instead, what you want to do is this basic principle of arouse and fulfill. And you just want the tiniest of little cue up there, such as one word. And, the word is shape, and that arouses the audience interest. Like, what in the world is this guy going to talk about with shape? And then you start to work on it with your vocal channel of communication, which is, I've got the word shape up here. And what that refers to is the shape of our knowledge over the years has changed from this to that, blah, blah, blah. And you elaborate. And now everybody's listening really closely because they've been stimulated by just that one word. Whereas if you fill it with a ton of visual stimuli, and how in the world will we ever get that across at the primary level to science people? And the answer is, I don't think you ever will, until the day comes that the introductory textbooks are willing to allocate the first chapter to that kind of stuff. And I understand those textbooks having been created 40 to 50 years ago when we were not in an information glutted world and they could have their way. But now we're in the TikTok world. We're in the losing focus world. And the time lag is just astounding to me. And this panel I'm on this week, they sent me all these documents that I am going to point out on the panel. This stuff looks like it was written in the 1980s or 90s. I mean, you're just denying that the communications environment has changed. Do you know what TikTok is? Do you have any understanding of how short the attention span is? And if you do, why are you still writing the stuff out in the same format that people wrote in the 1980s? I do not understand. Do you understand that?
I think that there's people don't really understand the competition for attention, and people, the thing is, I honestly, I want to push back a little bit, because I think people's attention span is fine, honestly, because people will still go and they'll sit through a 2.5-hour movie. No problem. Nobody loses focus. People can pay attention for that amount of time. it helps that it's in a movie theater, but the problem is when you go into a movie theater, there's a lot less competition for attention, right?
Exactly.
Because you don't want to be that person who has, who's looking at their phone and having the blinding white light in the middle of a movie theater. So people can still focus, but there is so much competition for that time that if they don't,
okay, but no, this is really good topic, and we're in the home stretch here of the last 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah,
but that's a really good topic, because let me toss back to you an anecdote that came up in our course, which is a year ago, we did a thing called the Narrative Blitz, where we put together 24 3 to 4 minute videos of the 20 people involved with the course. Each one, I worked with them. I had them, we wrote a talk, they gave the talk, and then Matt and I edited the thing down into these 3 to 4 minute videos. And so then we started using a few of the videos at times with some of these people that would do sections in the course. And one person in particular would come on in the course and present slides and give the standard talk that person would give. And I'm not giving any hints on who this person is, and did it probably 4 or 5 times. And each time when you get to the end of the presentation, we'd have Q&A, and there'd be 1 or 2 or maybe 3 questions that would come up and just barely fill the 5 minutes we had at the end for Q&A. And then after about 5 times being in the course, on the 6th time, we ended up showing the 4-minute video that we'd done in the Narrative Blitz for that person. And when that 4-minute video ended, there were about 7 or 8 questions automatically. Now, what happened there? What happened is that when the person would do the slideshow and give their presentation live, they would and waver, and the cadence and inflection, everything like that. The pacing was much slower, more drawn out, and didn't really hit these moments that we had after Matt and I had gone at this thing, editing it down into a compact 3.5 minute video, that every word was chosen there and scrutinized. And that's what you get in a movie, is you've got a whole bunch of brains all going to work on a movie, boiling this thing down into massively stimulating narrative structure, if it's well done, that builds and builds and builds. And everything in there, ideally, has been worked on for 1 to 2 years, as all these brains sharpen it down to the perfect narrative structure, as compared to somebody getting up there and giving you a slideshow presentation about the same content that was in the movie. And that's the result you see is the number of questions asked are an indicator of how active the brains were engaged in the course of that. Right. So we were blown away by the idea that the exact same material boiled down into a tightly edited 3.5 minute video caused all these brains to ask 7 or 8 questions instantly. Whereas normally when the person rambles and gives it, you don't get that activation. Is that making sense on that?
Yes, it absolutely does. And I think that you're right on point. And this is another issue that comes up with, working with scientists like myself, is we have so many plates that we are spinning. We have to teach, we have to do service, we have to do and that putting in the time, whether it's for a poster or a talk or whatever else, to put on that kind of polish that can really hold somebody's attention for however long it is needed. That's really a tough thing to do. So I think that that is a fair point.
Yeah, no, that's a really good, let me give you a comparison right there. That this is utterly bizarre, but in February, I gave this hour-long talk to the Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla. And 2 days later, an epidemiologist buddy of mine called me up on Saturday morning and said 3 different people that were in your audience wrote to me and said they thoroughly enjoyed the talk. And they found it so enjoyable because it was so simple and smooth and easy to follow and understand. And then I immediately shot back at him and I said, it was simple and easy to follow and understand because I spent 2 solid months working on that talk. From the first day that they booked it with me, I started work that afternoon. And because I lead this bizarre life here, that I don't have committee meetings and all those sorts of things that you get as a professor. I know the burden that I was a professor. I saw that burden and I broke away
Right.
to where I am now. And so when I go at it on something like that, I really literally round the clock. I'm sitting out there surfing on the surfboard, rehearsing this thing in my mind. I'm driving around town and playing it. And that one presentation there, I spent 2 solid months, day in and day out, working on it, smoothing it, getting the narrative structure exactly right to the point where I could rehearse it in the car without any slides. I had it all memorized, and that's what came out.
Yep.
But that's a mountain of effort in advance of that. And you get back what you put in. And this is exactly what we're getting now, especially with this group at Pfizer, where they're the people right now. We did last week. It's 2 people that are giving a talk in a week. And they said, we've been giving this talk for a couple of years. We've never put in this amount of time and effort. But what they did last week was much smoother and more interesting and more narrative structure than ever before. That's the lesson of it all. That's the lesson of the narrative, Jim. You get back what you put in. And let's pull all this together, because this is really fun. We could go on for another couple of hours, but it's fun talking with someone like you, because you're conversant in the ABT framework, and that there's a shortage of people in the communications world for me that have really absorbed this stuff. There's a lot in the business world now. There's a lot of business folks that I can talk for hours with, because they've absorbed and they're using it. There's still a shortage in the science world, because a lot of these science organizations have just, ostracized me or whatever. They just don't want anything to do with it. But when I come across somebody like you who really gets it, there's so much that we can dig into. And that leads me to the final topic, which you're a good sport about this, but the fact is that you are part of the founding of the whole narrative spectrum, because in 2013 or so, or 2014, when I was writing the Houston book, I had given that talk, the keynote address at the SICB, the Society for Integrative and Comparative Biology. Were you there at that one, 2013 in Austin?
Yes,
I think,
because I co-organized a symposium on
parasitology,
parasite manipulation of behavior.
There you go.
The zombie symposium.
There you go. And as a result of my giving that keynote talk, they gave me a subscription to their journal for a couple of years. And so they sent me the volume that had all the papers from your symposium. And I just dug in on those, and I used them as the first source for crafting all this ABT stuff as I was writing the Houston book. And lo and behold, I came across that. Now let me read here the beginning of this. I've got it copied on so this was the abstract for your paper. I don't even know which author you were. You can tell us more when I finish this, but it was, and I don't even have the title here, but let me just read the first few sentences. So it began with, for trophically transmitted parasites that manipulate the phenotype of their hosts, whether the parasites do or do not experience resource competition depends on such factors as the size of the parasites relative to their host, intensity of infection, the extent to which parasites share the cost of defending against the host's immune system or manipulating their host, and the extent to which parasites share transmission goals. Despite theoretical expectations for situations which either no or positive or negative density dependence should be observed, most studies document only negative density dependence for trophically transmitted parasites. However, this trend may be an artifact of most studies having focused on systems in which parasites are large relative to their hosts. Yet, systems are common where parasites are small relative to their hosts, and these trophically blah, 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 went on from there. Those sentences number 2, 3, and 4 in that abstract began sequentially, the first one with despite, the second one with however, the third one with yet. And what was going on there was a lot of interesting stuff, but it was just going in multiple narrative directions, multiple threads, and very rich in narrative content, to the point where it made me realize this is what we get with academics at times, is they've got this ability to communicate on multiple narrative planes. And this is a prime example. And so all 3 of those sentences begin with words of contradiction. However, or despite, however, yet, all 3 of those are words of contradiction, but is by far the most common word of contradiction. And it's what's used in most broad communication. But academics get into these other words, despite, however, yet. And interestingly, side note, this whole paper that we're working on right now, where we've looked at these metrics, one of the things that we calculated was for the 3 different groups. So we've got articles from a magazine, articles from a research journal, and articles from internal reports. And turns out the magazine almost never uses however. the scientific papers, the research reports, some of them use, however, as much as the word but. And then the boring internal reports don't use it much either, because they just go on and on and on. But that's really fascinating. And so this is what you get with academics, is this DHY form, this mode of communication, which is why they're able to have these incredibly sophisticated, complex discussion among experts at a scientific meeting, where they can be talking on 3, 4, and 5 narrative planes all at once, and nobody can follow them. And so were you horrified when you found out that I used your abstract for the DHY formulation?
No, it was a fair call. Because I know that and I know that the one, some projects are easier to sort of understand in terms of an and but therefore, and there are some projects which are harder to fit into the ABT format. Yeah. And sometimes you don't always make it there. And that was one of the cases with, I didn't quite make it there. These things happen, and that's okay.
Yeah. No, well, and the other thing to say about that is, when I gave the TED Med talk in 2013 at the big kind of public health medical conference, was the first time I really reached a big audience with the and template. And so many people came up and said, I've been giving and talks my whole career. I never knew there was anything wrong with it. And I would say there's nothing wrong with it, but there's just a better form, which is is ABT. And I would say the same thing with DHY, which is, until somebody comes along and points it out to you, it's kind of accepted. You really have to get sensitized to it and start to spot it. That's a lot of the challenge, is that we're working with a lot of people that don't have any narrative background and training, trying to explain this to them. And it just takes time. It's a long, slow process, but the more you get it. The last thing to say about that Pfizer group is that just last week, talking with them, we're getting to the point now where I can see with all 15 of those people that are at this stage now, they'll never be able to listen to another and presentation and not feel uncomfortable. Their brains are getting shaped now into narrative intuition, where very quickly, if they're listening to one of those things, they're going to be thinking, where's the narrative thread here? Where's the contradiction? Where's the but? What's the problem? What are we talking about here? And that's the goal, is to get,
what are we doing here?
What are we doing here? To get people to start asking those questions in a world that's got too much information and needs this sort of scrutinizing of structure. And that's the only hope of working against that. So thank you very much, Zen, for joining in this discussion. And sorry if I got too charged up and overrode you and blabbed about a bunch of other things, but that's what happens when I find somebody that I can talk ABT with, is that it's really fun to dig deep on this sort of stuff. And thank you for what you've been doing and putting it into the poster description. And we got to get out there and promote your poster book more. You got to get more people writing reviews of it on Amazon. You've only got 5 reviews on there, right?
Yes, I occasionally bug people about that, but I've got to say that the book came out a year ago, but even last year, there weren't, most conferences were still online. That's
true. Right.
And
right. So you're just getting going.
So I'm really thinking that, and I really tried to make the book something that was going to last. That was not going to be of the moment. I didn't realize how much it would be tested. But I'm really hoping that this year, as we're just coming up to sort of the main academic conference season, so I'm really hoping that this year people are going to start looking for those kinds of resources again, as they start to go back into more face-to-face meetings and more actual poster sessions at conferences. So that is something that I am looking forward to.
Well, I ordered a copy. It's on the way, and I will be writing my review and giving it only 1 star. I don't care what it says. I'm just joking.
Well, I will say one thing that I thought a lot about while writing this book. Yes. It's really hard with a how-to book to put in narrative, but I kept, every time I was revising that book, I thought I was looking for, where can I put in the word but?
Yeah.
Every time. It's like, okay, I can't turn the whole book into a narrative because that's not what a manual is for, but I can try to make as many narrative moments as I can.
That's what it's about, and the more you work with ABT, the more your brain starts to get shaped into that narrative intuition. And then the next thing you know, you start writing things. And then after the fact, you look at the butt to end ratio and, oh my goodness, look at that. It matches. We did that with Nancy Knowlton in the course. She's got a book that she's completing right now. And Matt took the draft of the manuscript and ran it through the narrative metrics. And sure enough, it scored really high. She's got very strong narrative content. And she didn't think about butts as she was writing it. She just wrote the way she communicates nowadays and came out really high on that. Cool, man. All right. Well, great talking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And we will get out there and do what we can to help promote the book. It's exactly what's needed. And we will have you back sometime in the not too distant future, and keep in touch.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to talk to you again, Randy.
You betcha. Okay. Thanks. See everybody next time on the ABT Time podcast. Adios.